Episode 71. Is he your boyfriend? Dr. Walter finished his lecture with a resonating applause, and the clapping and cheering continued as Dr. Mila Brown took the podium. She was dressed in a plain suit and looked determined and poised. Her sharp eyes and crisp voice reminded people of Madame Curie. She spoke about her research on one of the most impoverished areas in Africa, the Kingdom of Lesotho, which has the highest altitude in the world. Her 3-year-long research made her the recipient of one of the most valued awards in the scientific community, the Graf Award. Moreover, while working on her research, she also set up an effective cultivation project for cereal crops based on the local ecological environment and the state of the nation and its civilians in the hope of solving the most severe famine problems. As a result, her work drew enormous attention from all over the world. Nobody made a single sound during the entire lecture. The professors were listening carefully with knitted eyebrows, and the students were also paying full attention. Dr. Mila gave a lively description of the 3-year and 5-year plans for the country, along with painting a true picture of the extent of its poverty and future developments. "That is so great." Sitting beside Jacob, Kathy mused. Jacob was no longer spacing out like earlier, as he was listening earnestly. The 1-hour lecture was soon over, and the stormy applause filled the auditorium. Dr. Mila curtsied to the audience in the hall and then walked down from the podium. The principal came up to the podium once again to conclude the informative and intellectually enriching event. As soon as the principal finished his speech, Kathy quickly took 2 books out of her purse. She said to Jacob in a rushed voice, "We've got to get to the front row soon. I want to get their autographs." "What?" Jacob looked at her, dazed. He heard the words that came out of Kathy's mouth and froze. "Don't worry about it. Just run as fast as you can," Kathy said as she handed Jacob one of the books. Before Jacob could comprehend anything, the principal ended his speech as he said, "So that everyone gets a chance to meet Dr. Mila and Walter Brown, they have agreed to give the students their autographs. However, considering the huge crowd that has gathered here today, each student can only have 1 book signed. Meanwhile, I hope all the students can keep order and maintain the excellent image of the university." Dr. Walter and Dr. Mila left the auditorium, escorted by the security. The mayor and deputy mayor closely followed them, chatting and smiling. Although the principal had asked the students to keep order, nothing could slow down the passion of the fans. All of them flooded out of the door like free-flowing water. Kathy also dragged Jacob and ran out wildly. No one could tell how a timid girl like her got so rough. Although the 2 of them were sitting at the front of the undergraduate students area, about 100 people were lining up ahead of them when they rushed outside. The students, who had come from other universities, were all well prepared as everyone had a book written by the guest lecturers. These students were also seated right at the front, which allowed them to leave the hall earlier than others. As Kathy waited at the back of the line, her pretty face turned red. She was still dragging Jacob by his arm, and now it had the imprint of her 5 fingers. Standing beside Kathy, Jacob felt quite helpless. "Kathy is usually so serious and sincere. I didn't know there were times when she could be this cute." Jacob was staring at her pink cheeks and the twinkle in her eyes. Dr. Walter and Dr. Mila sat behind a long desk, smiling at every student that came up and asked for autographs. The officials of the city didn't leave, probably out of respect. They sat beside them at the desk and looked at the power couple who were signing autographs with enthusiasm. It was good for their image to sit beside such renowned scientists, especially in front of the media. The cameras were constantly flashing as soon as the book signing began, and the reporters talked about the enthusiasm of the students as well as the respect given to the scientists by the government officials. It was an honor for the officials to come to the lecture given by both scientists in person. However, their cheerful and supportive presence during the book signing had definitely promoted Dr. Walter and Dr. Mila's status as well. Both scientists were well known globally, and even the officials of the city treated them with great respect. If anyone were to offend the two respectable scientists, that person would probably be in trouble. Owing to the contributions of these two world-renowned scientists, Wisconsin's technological development, as well as the high-tech and environmental protection industries, had skyrocketed. The line for autographs was moving slowly. Kathy stood on her tiptoes as it drove her crazy that she wasn't able to talk to her idols while they were so close to her. Finally, after waiting in line for half an hour, they were getting closer to the desk. Finally, Jacob and Kathy got their turn to get their books signed as the medical students ahead of them left the queue after talking to the guest lecturers. Kathy rushed forward with a book in her hands, but got irritated when she saw Jacob moving slowly. She called out to him, "Jacob, hurry up!" This wasn't the kind of tone he was used to. This was a completely new side of Kathy that Jacob was witnessing today. She was very impatient because she had waited for so long. Also, Jacob was indeed moving too slowly when it was their turn to get her idol's autographs. Jacob paced himself, held out the book, and went up to Kathy awkwardly. With the long desk in between, Kathy was facing Dr. Walter, while Jacob was facing Dr. Mila. "Dr. Brown, I have read all of your books. It is such a pity that only one book can be signed." It wasn't easy for Kathy to have the chance to be so close to her idol, and she couldn't help but speak quickly. "Well, it's nice to meet you, too." Dr. Walter smiled and took the book from Kathy, opened it to the title page, picked up his pen, and signed his name smoothly. Meanwhile, Dr. Mila was looking at Jacob, who was quietly standing on the other side of the desk. She also opened the book to the title page and signed her name. "Dr. Mila, I am your fan, too. I have read all of your books as well," Kathy said to Dr. Mila, content after getting the autograph from Dr. Walter. "Really?" Dr. Mila observed Kathy carefully as she smiled sweetly at her. "Yes, you are an inspiration to me and so many girls around the world," Kathy complimented Dr. Mila. Kathy was staring at them in excitement but had no idea what more to say. She didn't want this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to end just yet. As she was wondering if it was time to leave, Dr. Walter asked unexpectedly, "Is this your boyfriend?" "Oh." Kathy paused for a second. She was too nervous to say anything and ended up blurting out, "Not yet." Jacob was slightly surprised at Kathy's reply, and his body shivered a little. His brain completely blanked out for a moment. Dr. Walter laughed as he looked at Kathy's innocent face without saying anything. "Excuse me, please walk forward if you have got your autographs," the student who was in charge of maintaining order said to Kathy and Jacob. Kathy realized that she shouldn't hold up the line. She smiled at Dr. Walter and Dr. Mila brightly and dragged Jacob out of the hall. "Give it to me." Kathy took the book with Dr. Mila's autograph, worrying that Jacob might accidentally damage it. Then she put it cautiously into her purse together with the book signed by Dr. Walter. "You are so silly. It is such a rare chance to see great scientists like them, and yet you didn't even say a word," Kathy complained to Jacob. She looked down at her purse and smiled contentedly. She was cheerful, and she said to Jacob, "All right, but you did a good job today of getting me an autograph from them. You deserve a treat." Episode 72, Dinner Date. Kathy's excitement was obvious, and she was in a brilliant mood. However, what Jacob was concerned about at the moment was that somebody might call him. He wasn't too interested in food right now, so he refused politely. "Today's lectures were fantastic. Kathy, I appreciate that you got me the ticket and let me tag along. As for the treat, that's fine. We'll hang out some other time." "Good. So you finally admit that the lectures were excellent. How about you treat me, then? Kathy said with a huge smile. Her face was still pink with excitement. Oh, Jacob hesitated. What, you don't want to? I showed you the wonder of science, but you don't even want to thank me? Kathy squinted her eyes. She was being playful, another side of hers that Jacob hadn't seen before. It's not like that. I'm just worried that if we don't go back now, the dorm gates will be locked, Jacob explained. The university knows how many students are attending this lecture, and naturally they'll all eat late, so the dorm gates will close at 11 o'clock tonight, Kathy replied matter-of-factly. Seeing Kathy in such a good mood, Jacob had to agree. Okay, I'll take you out for dinner. Let's go to that burger place nearby. After all, Kathy had treated him twice already. It was only fair that Jacob took her out tonight. Okay. Kathy got her bike from the parking lot, and Jacob took the driver's seat. He took her to the place he had mentioned, and it was right outside the west gate of the university. On a balmy night, Jacob was riding smoothly on the quiet road around campus with Kathy in the back seat. The night breeze softly blew through the leaves, and everything seemed so quiet and peaceful. It reminded Jacob of the last time he walked side by side with Kathy outside the university. University life would be such a failure if you didn't date during the 4 years. With Kathy in the back seat, the strong belief of the countless students came across Jacob's mind. He looked at the auditorium, which was still dazzling. He also noticed Kathy, who was sitting in the back while staring quietly at the artificial lake in front of them with a contented smile on her face. Long eyelashes, eyes shining like stars, pretty features, shiny hair, and a graceful smile on her face. Kathy is so beautiful, thought Jacob. He pretended to look at the auditorium, but he was actually looking at her as he rode the bike. The burger joint was as busy as usual when they arrived. The dorm would be locked at 11 o'clock, and so the enthusiastic students weren't willing to go back that early. Are you hungry, Kathy? I'll buy you their special combo. While parking the bike, Jacob said to Kathy. Although Jacob didn't invite girls out for food often, he still knew that he couldn't send her off by just buying her a cheap cheeseburger. Sure. Kathy rubbed her stomach and replied. She indicated that she was indeed hungry. Jacob! A familiar voice startled them, and Jacob instantly knew who it was. He turned around and saw his roommates sitting at one of the corner tables. One of them had yelled out Jacob's name. Sam had tried to stop him, but he was too late. You guys are eating here too? Kathy was quite surprised to see the 3 other guys from Jacob's dorm. Since they met, Jacob had no choice but to walk over to them with Kathy. Why are you guys here? Jacob asked them. We got bored at the dorm, so we came out for some food, Sam answered while wiping the cheese from his mouth. Okay, then we'll eat together, said Kathy. She turned to Jacob and suggested, let's sit here with them. Jacob didn't know how to answer, but Sam suddenly stood up, leaving a whole uneaten meal of burger and fries on his plate. No way. You guys go ahead. We're done now and we're ready to go back. Really? Staring at the hardly eaten burgers on the plate, Kathy said doubtfully. No, for real. We were planning to bring the rest to the dorm. Grabbing the food on the plate quickly with one hand, Sam twisted his roommate's ear with the other and said, Let's go now. His roommate yelled in pain while trying to save his ear. It took him too long to realize why he shouldn't have called out Jacob's name. He then stood up with the leftover beer in his hand. You can't drink beer in the dorm, Kathy reminded him. The guy put down the beer unwillingly, wiped his hand, and got the bill from the owner. The 3 of them ran away from the joint like thieves. Kathy sighed helplessly as she saw them scamper away. She really didn't understand boys. So, let's find a seat? Jacob asked as he looked at Kathy. Fine, let's go. Kathy nodded. They sat down at a table by the wall, and Jacob ordered a barbecue burger for himself and a fried chicken meal for Kathy.
"Has Sam recovered from the injury?"
Kathy asked as they sat down.
"Yes, he's fine now. He has tough skin, so he recovered quickly. You saw how he was acting all lively just now,"
Jacob said with a smile.
"The punishment from the university was bizarre. I thought he would at least get a verbal warning. I couldn't believe that they just let him go. I was glad, though,"
Kathy said.
"Sam had the same thought. He felt so relieved when the announcement was made. He's now in a better state of mind than he was after the fight,"
Jacob replied.
"It's good that you weren't involved this time,"
Kathy continued. Jacob smirked. What Kathy didn't know was that Jacob had put in an enormous effort into getting Sam out of trouble. Otherwise, just like she said, no matter how much partiality the university showed, as the party that started the fight, Sam would get a warning at least.
"Speaking of which, you are great at fighting."
After thinking for a while, Kathy said,
"I didn't know you could be that tough and strong."
Jacob guessed that she was about to use the word violent, but she chose to call him strong instead.
"You are the same, Kathy. You used to be so gentle and serious about everything, but during the lecture today, you were so excited as if you were a teenager,"
Jacob said.
"Really? Was I?"
Sitting up straight, Kathy looked at Jacob with her shiny black eyes.
"Your face is still pink,"
Jacob smiled and said. Kathy didn't believe his words, so she put her hands on her cheeks to check. She could feel the warmth radiating off her cheeks. She got embarrassed and tried to open her mouth to explain, but it only made Jacob laugh at her more.
"Fine, I made a scene today, but Dr. Walter and Dr. Mila are my idols. It makes sense that I got so excited when I met them in person,"
she concluded after composing herself.
"Yeah, it makes sense."
Jacob nodded sarcastically. Kathy frowned when Jacob made fun of her, but she decided to let it go. She continued asking questions.
"Are you facing any problems with Michael?"
"Why did you ask that all of a sudden?" Jacob raised his head.
"I heard that the fight happened because you and Michael didn't get along well,"
Kathy said seriously. "I don't like him, and he doesn't like me. That's it," Jacob said casually.
"How about I be the mediator or something, and you guys can resolve this matter?"
Kathy said, after thinking for a few seconds.
"Don't bother, Kathy. You don't have to get involved in this. Have some chicken."
Jacob pushed the plate of fried chicken towards Kathy. Kathy nodded, but she was still worried about Jacob. However, it seemed like Jacob didn't care about it, so Kathy thought he probably had some people to rely on. What happened to Michael didn't really concern her. It was her brother, the captain of the basketball team, that made her worry. She wasn't sure what her brother would do to Jacob, as it was because of him that the basketball team had suffered. The way the university dealt with the incident was strangely harsh on the team, and nothing happened to Jacob and Sam, which seemed unfair to the players. She believed her brother would be resentful of this announcement. But there was nothing she could do about it right now. As they continued to eat, they talked about all kinds of things that were happening in class. The topic went back to the special lecture they had attended. While he thought about the secrets hidden deep in his heart, Jacob felt the enormous admiration Kathy had for Dr. Walter and Dr. Mila. As they kept talking, none of them noticed that there were fewer and fewer customers in the restaurant.
"Shit, it's 11:30.
Looking at the clock on the restaurant's wall, Kathy shrieked. Episode 73, Jacob and Kathy's Night Out. Jacob turned around to look at the time, and that is when he noticed that there were only a few people left in the restaurant. A little panic set in his heart, knowing that it was way past the closing time of the dorm. He couldn't believe that he got so lost while talking to Kathy.
"Sir, can we have our check, please?"
He took out his wallet and said in a hurry. It took about 5 minutes to make the payment, and Jacob and Kathy rushed out of the burger joint. As soon as they stepped out, they realized that the whole street was already empty and that it was fairly dark since a lot of the stores around them had shut their lights off as well.
"What now?"
Kathy looked a little worried as she clutched her bag tightly in her hands. She had never spent a night outside of her home or the dorm. In fact, this was the first time she had missed the curfew time of the dorm. She was continuously kicking herself mentally for putting herself in this situation.
"It's all right. Maybe the resident supervisor will allow us in."
Jacob rode her bike with her on the back seat and rode into the residential area as he comforted her. He pedaled as fast as the bike could go with 2 riders. They reached the entrance of the female dorm building number 3 in the South region and found the light in the administrative office of the dorm gate turned off. That meant the supervisor had already gone to sleep. On top of that, all the lights in the dorm building were off as well, which showed that the curfew had begun. Kathy jumped off the bike in a hurry and called towards the window of the administrative office,
"Ma'am, ma'am."
Nothing happened. Jacob knew that the supervisor of their male dormitory building number 7 always slept late, and he should be able to wake him up even if he went to bed. This meant that he could get into his room even at this hour. However, since Kathy couldn't get in now, he couldn't leave her there to fend for herself all night, especially when both of them were equally at fault. Kathy's shouts yielded no results. So, she turned back to Jacob and asked,
"What now?"
She looked very close to tears. The most assertive and confident girl in the class looked helpless at the moment. Jacob was worried too. Not for himself, since he had spent nights outside with Sam quite often, but having Kathy with him added complications to the situation. He had no option other than to give her the only solution he could think of. He said,
"If you agree, can we spend the night at the internet cafe?" "Is it safe there?"
Kathy hesitated. The environment in the internet cafe wasn't very hospitable, especially for girls. It was more like the boys' space than a professional establishment. Jacob thought about it and suggested,
"Or we could stay at the motel down the road."
Kathy looked at him, startled. She hesitated again and asked,
"Have you stayed there before?"
Kathy had always been an introvert who was obsessed with books. This was her first time in a situation like this. She trusted Jacob, but it was still way too out of her comfort zone.
"Not really, but I've heard it doesn't cost much, approximately $20 per night. As long as we have our IDs, I think the student cards work too."
He wanted Kathy to feel comfortable, but he didn't know how. He didn't want her to think that he was experienced in all of this.
"Is that kind of place safe?"
Kathy asked the same question after thinking about it for a bit.
"Yes, it should be safe."
Jacob didn't sound so sure about his answer. All kinds of people stayed in such cheap motels, and he had heard of incidents that had happened there. At first, he was thinking about finding a place for Kathy and going back to his dorm, but he couldn't leave her alone in a shady place like that.
I can stay with you if you're worried."
Jacob coughed twice, pretentiously, and asked awkwardly,
"That's not appropriate."
She hesitated for a bit before rejecting it. Since none of his ideas seemed to work out, Jacob suggested,
"Or we can call your roommates and ask them to knock on the supervisor's door so that she can open the gate for you." "I didn't bring my cell phone. That is the problem,"
Kathy said, helplessly. She came out just for the guest lecturers, so she didn't bother to bring her cell phone. Who would have known that this could happen?
"I don't have their numbers, and neither would Sam and the guys," said Jacob.
He and his roommates mostly kept to themselves, and every one of them had a tough luck with girls on campus.
There are still a couple of hours left before dawn, and we need to find somewhere to stay.
Kathy gave up after knocking on the window of the administrative office for a while. Fortunately, Jacob was here with her, so she wasn't too desperate. Jacob suddenly thought of something and said, "We can go to the 24-hour karaoke place and spend the night there. A room from midnight to 6 a.m. will only cost $15.
Yes, that's good.
Kathy finally agreed to his suggestion. That was a place she had been to before. It was mostly open all night for everyone, but they had good security, so getting a private room there could work out for them. It was cold at night, and they couldn't get into the dorms. After the decision was made, Jacob took her to the place on her bike. He thought about the suggestions he had just mentioned to her while biking, and realized that the one he looked forward to was spending the night at a motel room with her.
Damn it! What is wrong with me? Why would I think that?
Jacob kicked himself for having that thought. On the other hand, Kathy, who was sitting behind him, didn't think that much. She was only touched by Jacob's good intention in keeping her company so late at night. She knew that the guys usually returned to their dorms late, and the supervisor there was used to them coming back after closing time. Therefore, she was sure that Jacob could still go back to his dorm if he wanted to.
It is all my fault. If I hadn't gotten too lost in our conversation and didn't forget about the time, Jacob could still go back to his dorm instead of wandering around with me so late at night.
Kathy criticized herself in the back seat as she bit her lip. They went to the karaoke place, which was located on the second floor of a famous barbecue restaurant. They asked for a small room for a few hours. Seeing only the two of them there at midnight, the waiter who led them to the room kept staring at them with a suspicious look. Once they entered the room, he told them bluntly, "The room's only meant for singing, not anything else."
Anything else? What else?
Kathy suddenly understood the implied meaning as soon as she asked and blushed hard. "I mean," the waiter added after seeing her blush, "you can sing here, but you cannot sleep. We know students like you."
"Oh, I see,"
Kathy murmured. Her blush became more apparent when she noticed Jacob looking at her. She hurried into the room and sat down in a corner. The waiter explained a few more things to Jacob, turned on the equipment, and left the room. Kathy sat awkwardly on the couch as she looked around the room, still blushing. "Don't worry, they have strict rules here." Jacob randomly grabbed a microphone and put it beside him. "I came here with Sam and the guys before, but guys like us are at the Internet Cafe a lot more than here."
"I know. I came with some of the girls before as well. At least it is safer than both the Internet Cafe and the motel."
Kathy nodded. Jacob knew that Kathy was tired as he noticed the redness in her eyes. He said, "You can go to sleep, Kathy. I'll stay up in case the waiter comes back." Kathy was touched by everything he was doing for her.
"How can I let you—"
But Jacob interrupted her in between.
"It's okay. I always stay up late, and I'm used to it."
He waved off her concern. Then, in an attempt to lighten the mood, he added, "Don't worry, I will guard you with my life." Kathy smiled at his effort and bit her lip in contemplation. She wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. Jacob took off his jacket and put it over her shoulders. "You might feel a bit chilly after you fall asleep. Anyway, get some sleep. I'll listen to some music and sing a few songs. It will keep me awake." He stood up and clicked on some popular songs. Then he sat back down beside Kathy.
"Jacob is such a good person,"
Kathy sighed as she looked at him with her eyes semi-closed, lying on the couch. As soon as she closed her eyes, all the worry and fatigue of the day caught up with her, and she sighed in relief. Jacob picked up the microphone as he listened to the familiar music. He turned on the voiceover and randomly hummed along. He made sure to keep the volume low so he wouldn't disturb Kathy. Kathy smiled as she secretly looked at him through her squinted eyes while pretending to be asleep. Episode 74. I'm in Trouble. A couple of songs later, Kathy's eyelids became heavier as she listened to the familiar melodies. She dozed off completely as Jacob's humming sounded like a lullaby. When she opened her eyes again, she saw Jacob sleeping in a very uncomfortable sitting position. It looked like he tried to stay up as much as he could, but fell asleep while singing. She sat up, and her shoes made a squeaky noise on the sofa. Jacob heard the sound and woke up immediately. The microphone in his hand fell to the floor.
You really didn't sleep all night?
Kathy rubbed her eyes, saw the dark circles around Jacob's eyes, and asked guiltily.
That waiter was patrolling by the door all night. I couldn't sleep even if I tried.
Jacob laughed as he stretched his arms.
Did you sleep okay? It was all right. I had a few dreams,
Kathy replied as she returned the jacket to Jacob and straightened her clothes. She stood up and stretched as she yawned. She was grateful that they could find a decent place to spend the night, no matter how uncomfortably.
What time is it?
She asked.
It's almost 6. The time for the room will be up at 6,
Jacob replied.
Okay,
Kathy nodded.
Thank you so much for yesterday.
It's nothing. These types of things happen sometimes. Jacob stood up and said, Let's go get some breakfast.
You don't want to sleep for a bit?
Kathy looked at him in confusion. Jacob shook his head.
It's fine. It's not even 6 yet. You should sleep for a bit. There's no use going back to the dorm since it's not open yet. I'll be on the lookout for you this time,
Kathy said. She saw Jacob's tired face and suddenly realized that this was the first time she had stayed overnight alone with a guy. Jacob still shook his head.
There's no use. It'll be 6 in half an hour.
He knew that he wouldn't be able to get up so quickly.
Let's sing then,
Kathy changed her expression and said.
Really?
Jacob was a bit surprised.
There's still half an hour left. We'll be wasting it anyway and might as well use this time to do something fun,
Kathy said, walking up to the karaoke machine and choosing a song. The first song flashed on the screen. After half a night of sleep, Kathy was already energetic. She picked up the microphone without being shy, found the key to the melody, and started singing. Jacob was pleasantly surprised to hear her melodious voice. He watched her sing with a smile and really enjoyed this side of her. After the first song, Kathy continued to sing the second song. Her voice was sweet and lively, and the smile on her face seemed to create a sense of happiness. Jacob sat on the sofa and looked at Kathy quietly. Unexpectedly, the class topper was also a pro at karaoke. All the songs she sang were famous romantic numbers, mostly about new love.
Is she singing these songs for me?
Jacob suddenly thought for a fleeting moment before dismissing the idea as too far-fetched. After singing 6 songs continuously, Kathy abruptly took out another microphone and handed it to Jacob.
Come and join me, she said.
No, I can't. Jacob waved his hands quickly.
Let's sing together. There are only the 2 of us. What are you afraid of?
Kathy put the microphone in Jacob's hands enthusiastically. Before he could argue, the melody had already begun playing. Jacob had to hold the microphone and sing awkwardly. He wasn't sure if his potential had reached new heights overnight or what, but Jacob, who hadn't slept for the whole night, sang perfectly with a husky voice.
Not bad. Let's do another song.
Kathy swayed her hands and said happily. Jacob tried to refuse, but had to give in. They sang the next song and had a lot of fun.
Geez, you are so good at singing. Stop pretending already.
Kathy rolled her eyes at Jacob. Jacob found it a bit weird. How did his voice become so full and broad? Was it because he cultivated the spirit concentration scroll? Getting a melodious voice was not a trait he had expected to gain from it. They were just about to pick their next song when they were interrupted by the waiter. "Excuse me, sir, your time in the room is up," he said. Jacob and Kathy both felt dejected, as it seemed like they hadn't sung enough, but they still had classes that day, so it was impossible to continue singing anyway. They looked at each other, smiled, and put down the microphones. Then they grabbed their stuff and checked out at the front desk. Kathy wanted to pay when they were checking out, but Jacob stopped her. Last night was supposed to be his treat. After they walked out, Kathy insisted on treating Jacob to breakfast, and Jacob couldn't help but accept it. They headed to a cafe nearby and ate 2 plates of hearty breakfast meals. The best part about their campus was that there were several cafes and restaurants near it, so the students always had various options to choose from. After breakfast, Jacob rode the bicycle and took Kathy back to campus, and they headed straight to the dorm area. The morning at campus was quite dull and quiet, as it was still too early for anyone to be around. The air was refreshing, and the environment was beautiful. Kathy sat in the back seat of the bicycle, and both of her hands held onto Jacob's shirt as her body swayed in the direction of the wind. She thought for a while and placed her head on Jacob's back. "It's cold in the morning. Do you want my jacket?" Jacob asked as he rode the bicycle. "It's fine." Kathy felt the warmth on Jacob's back through his shirt and whispered, I'm quite happy today," she suddenly said, after being silent for a while. "Sorry, what did you say?" Jacob didn't hear her, as he was concentrating on riding the bicycle. Kathy raised her voice and said, "Singing today was nice, and so was last night." The chilly morning breeze blew into her hair and face and sent her words into space. "Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it." Jacob was busy riding the bicycle and answered casually. "This idiot," thought Kathy, and shook her head in disappointment. Suddenly, organized shouts came from somewhere close by. 1, 2, 1, 2. "Jacob, change the route and go around." Kathy, who was sitting in the back, suddenly tugged on Jacob's shirt and urged him. "What?" Facing the wind and riding the bicycle, Jacob once again didn't hear her well. At that moment, the captain of the basketball team, Kyle, who was wearing a dry-fit sports t-shirt and was leading the whole sweaty basketball team, ran towards them. Jacob saw his face for the first time, and so he couldn't help but slow down. The giant guy was leading the jog at a moderate speed and turned his head at the same time to look at Jacob, who was riding the bike, and Kathy, who sat in the back seat. Kathy felt conflicted as she looked at her older brother. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. Other than the basketball team, who were doing their morning run, not a lot of students would be awake at this time. Jacob and Kathy came from the west entrance of the school. Usually, the students who ate at the restaurants and cafes nearby took that entrance. Kathy's brother saw the picture exactly like it was. Kathy had gone out to eat with Jacob and was coming back at an early hour in the morning. Kathy lowered her head and didn't know what to do. Her older brother, Kyle, led the others and ran past their bicycle emotionlessly. His face didn't even show any signs of recognizing his own sister. Kathy knew her older brother well enough, and his poker face was often his scariest expression. While Kathy was nervous about this, Jacob turned his head and looked at the basketball team that moved like a tall wall. He noticed that the 6 basketball players who got kicked out were not in the morning training. So this is the infamous Kyle. He has just lost 6 team members from his team because of the school's punishment. He must hate me, but it seems like he doesn't know me yet. Jacob could only come to this conclusion after seeing Kyle's indifference. So he started riding towards the dorm again, completely unaware of Kathy's predicament. Kathy, who was sitting in the back seat, could only think of one thing.
Oh no, I'm in trouble.
Episode 75. The Controversy. Jacob rode the bicycle to the residential buildings of the university and headed to Kathy's dorm building first. He dropped her off, waved her goodbye, and walked back to his dorm. The dorm gate had just opened a few minutes ago, and Jacob sneaked into the dorm when the guard wasn't paying attention. He went up to the third floor, entered his room, and found Sam and his other roommates fast asleep. There were a bunch of food wrappers, ketchup pouches, and empty beer bottles on the floor. Jacob walked in quietly, grabbed his towel and toothbrush, and decided to wash up. However, his arm bumped into a cup which was knocked down to the floor, making a noise loud enough to wake up Sam, who was sleeping nearby.
Jacob, you're back?
Sam asked sleepily.
Yeah,
Jacob admitted. As the two talked, the other two roommates woke up as well. They looked at Jacob, who was holding his towel and toothbrush and was moving around sneakily. They immediately grew suspicious and asked,
"What did you do last night?"
Jacob stuttered as he held his toothbrush and gestured. He couldn't say anything. He was trying hard to form words, but his voice box seemed to have given up on him. Sam, who was initially sleepy, suddenly woke up with a lot of energy.
"Don't tell me you and Kathy. Did you go to the next level already?"
he asked.
"What the hell? The dorm gate was already locked when I came back yesterday, so I went to the internet cafe for the whole night," Jacob finally said. "Kathy went as well?"
one of the guys asked. All three of them were now completely awake.
I don't know. After we ate yesterday, she went back to her dorm. I strolled around for a bit after she left and lost track of time. It was already too late to come back. "You do know that you can tell us if anything happened, right?"
Sam sat up and made a suggestive face at Jacob.
"Get lost."
Jacob flipped him off and walked out of the bedroom. The guy sitting next to Sam didn't believe his speculations. He thought,
"Why would a beautiful girl like Kathy hook up with Jacob this fast?"
However, the kind of things that had happened recently did prove that Jacob could indeed charm women.
"Jacob is so lucky,"
Sam sighed and said as he saw Jacob rushing out. The three of them also got up, got ready, and stepped out of their dorm room. They all headed to class with Jacob. As they walked by the cafeteria, they bumped into Kathy, who rode past them on her bicycle. She was an inherently friendly person, so she would greet her classmates and try to make small talk with them usually. But today, she rode her bicycle and passed by them in a hurry. Sam nudged Jacob teasingly as he looked at Kathy scampering away.
"Don't start with your nonsense when we get to class," Jacob warned him.
"Sure." Sam smiled even more nastily. The four of them stepped into the classroom and found that a lot of people were discussing the special lecture given by the two renowned scientists yesterday. Jacob looked in Kathy's direction and saw that she was talking to the girls in class as if nothing had changed.
"Why didn't you come back yesterday, Jacob? I wanted to play the new game with you guys."
Ryan, from their next room, saw Jacob walking in and yelled loudly. As they heard Ryan shout out, the girls sitting in the front turned their heads.
"He went to listen to the lecture with Kathy yesterday. Why would he come back and play stupid board games with you?"
A few guys who knew what had happened said promptly.
"Stop talking. Just stop."
Jacob, who was sitting in the back row, tried to quiet them down. The class soon began. Jacob, who thought everything would be over by now, discovered that the whispers had started to spread around the classroom. In a matter of moments, Sam received a message, turned around to nudge Jacob, and asked with surprise, "Hey, did you actually spend the night with Kathy? I was only joking with you." "Where did this information come from?" Jacob asked him. "The girls in the front row. They said that Kathy didn't come back to the dorm last night. Besides, she wasn't there when the dorm manager came for room inspection, and she could get into trouble for that." He then stared at Jacob in shock and asked, "Did you actually do it with her last night?" "What? No!" Jacob glared at his best friend for a question like that. At their age, it was quite normal to get physical, but since Jacob grew up listening to the sweet love stories of his grandparents, his thoughts were a little old school on the matter. He looked at Kathy, who was sitting in the front row, organizing her notes. It seemed like she wasn't bothered by the gossip. Suddenly, he felt that he should have dealt with last night's situation in a better way. He knew that Kathy really cared about her reputation in the class, and this could completely disrupt it for the rest of their time at this university. "Of course, they are all misinterpreting us. We went together and didn't return till the morning. I wish I had thought of a better solution," Jacob thought as he hit his head on the table. Ryan was still poking around for information, and Jacob suddenly turned his head and declared, "Stop! If any of you discuss this any further, then I won't be friends with them anymore." Seeing the good-tempered Jacob suddenly getting mad, Ryan and the others stopped talking right away and looked at him in confusion. Ever since the incident of Jacob beating up half of the basketball team had reached them, the guys from his class and his dorm started respecting him more. They were also scared of getting in his bad books. Some of the guys were even jealous of Jacob as they were crushing on Kathy, but they didn't dare say a word to him. Besides, Jacob's buddy, Sam, wasn't an easy guy to deal with either. Not only did he have many friends at the school, but he also had the members of the basketball team pay for his medical expenses after the injuries. That made the other students think that he had a powerful background. Jacob saw that all the gossip had died down after his uproar, and he began to focus and looked at Kathy in the front row. He noticed that her ears were red, and it seemed like she was affected by the conversations around her after all. For the time being, Jacob decided to keep some distance from her. Jacob's cell phone on the desk indicated that he had gotten a message. He picked up his cell phone and saw a message from an unknown number. He opened up the message and saw a few words. "What is the USA's capital for coal production?" Normally, Jacob would delete this kind of unknown message right away, but this time he was in the mood to annoy someone just like he was annoyed. So he replied, "What kind of a dumb question is that?" A few seconds later, he received another text message. "Just answer me or I'll show you who the dumb one is." Sensing the tone of the message, Jacob instantly knew who sent it. "God, this girl is texting me in the middle of her exam," he thought as he shook his head at Sophie's creative way of cheating. Jacob replied, "Wyoming, do the rest yourself. I won't answer you anymore." A few moments later, he received another message. "How many river basins are there in Texas?" Of course, she ignored what I said. Jacob didn't want to help Sophie cheat as her tutor, but as her fiancé, he wanted her to pass the exam, so he gave in and took another one. He sent a message back, 7, and I won't answer any more. A few minutes later, his cell phone vibrated again. Is there an end to this? Jacob took out his cell phone, and it was Sophie's message again. The answer is 8. I would fail if it were up to you. Jacob could sense the urgency in all these texts. After all, she was texting in the middle of an exam. You blame me for a question you couldn't answer. I'm sorry, miss, Jacob replied with sarcasm. He then sent a second one saying, Now quit wasting your time. Focus on the exam.
The exam is over already. I'm eating lunch now, Sophie replied again immediately. It's the first time Jacob texted Sophie in class. He had completely forgotten about whatever had happened this morning and had a smile on his face. How many exams do you have today? Jacob sent the message as he didn't want the conversation to end just yet. There are 2 more today, physics and chemistry. I'll be relying on you. Jacob received this message with a smiling emoticon. Jacob just shook his head with a smile and looked outside the window, thinking, 2 exams mean that she'll finish school around 2 o'clock. I don't have class at that time, so I guess I can pick her up from school. Episode 76. Surprise! Who are you texting, Jacob? Have you finally started dating someone? Asked one of Jacob's roommates as he saw him texting someone nonstop. It's just a friend, Jacob replied, putting his phone away. Sam grew inquisitive too and looked over at Kathy, who was sitting in the front row. He noticed that she was busy taking notes and that her phone was lying on her desk. The screen never lit up the entire time Jacob was texting. He knew that it wasn't her that Jacob had been texting. If it isn't Kathy, maybe Jacob is talking to another girl? He didn't come back last night. What if it wasn't Kathy who he spent the night with? The 4 of us always hang around at school, and we know who Jacob talks to, and lately it has been no one else other than Kathy. Who else could Jacob be texting? Sam was a bit confused, and his curiosity grew when he saw a secretive smile on Jacob's face while he was checking his messages. He knew it must have been a girl. Sam did not think of Jacob's tutoring job at night, but instead, his thoughts landed in a completely different direction. Susan. Would Jacob be that bold? People have been gossiping about him and Susan, but that is just gossip. No one would actually believe that Susan would become Jacob's girlfriend. Sam's thoughts got cut off when he heard the rest of the students moving out of the class. If anyone saw his face right now, they would be able to easily guess that he was making some deep calculations. He was trying to make sense of the situation, but couldn't derive any conclusion. As they all stepped out, they saw that it was raining outside and none of them had brought an umbrella. Though it was cloudy in the morning when they had stepped out of their dorm rooms, they ignored it, acting cool by not bringing umbrellas to class. It resulted in the 4 roommates running to the cafeteria and lining up with the other students of their class. The cafeteria was, as usual, packed since it was lunchtime. When the 4 of them ran into the cafeteria, the line for ordering food was already pretty long. It meant they would have to wait for a while before it was their turn. Hey! Sam nudged Jacob and pointed at the door of the cafeteria with his chin. Kathy was trying to wring off as much water from her hair as she could when she walked into the cafeteria. Half of her body was soaked. She probably didn't bring an umbrella with her today either because she didn't expect rain to come down this hard. The white shirt she was wearing became a little see-through and stuck to her like a second skin. Kathy! Jacob waved at her. Kathy looked at Jacob and nodded. She walked over as she squeezed the water out of her hair. The others grinned as soon as Jacob called Kathy over, especially Sam. Jacob immediately took his dark brown jacket off and put it around Kathy as soon as she came near him. Kathy was stunned when the jacket landed on her. She was really grateful to Jacob and was moved by his sincerity. Seeing this scene unfold, Sam thought to himself, Jacob definitely has his way with girls. Offering his jacket, such a classic trick. Your shirt is wet, so it has become a little see-through, Jacob explained in a whisper to Kathy. Kathy nodded in appreciation. She planned to go back to change and grab the umbrella after lunch. After taking off his jacket, Jacob was left with only a thin white tank top.
His semi-naked body and his wet hair made him feel weird amongst the crowd. The good thing was that the weather wasn't too cold. Although it was raining, the temperature hadn't dipped. So even if it was a little uncomfortable for Jacob to stand in the cafeteria like this, he knew he wouldn't catch a cold.
"Kathy, you can stand in front of me in the line if you'd like," Sam said cheerfully, remembering that this was one of Jacob's tricks and admiring him for it. "It's okay. I'm here with my friends, so I'll just go get in line with them over there. Thanks for the offer, though," she said as she walked towards her roommates, who were not far from them. She suddenly turned around after a few steps and said, "Thank you, Jacob. I'll return your jacket on Monday," she said with a smile. Jacob waved generously and replied, "It's okay. You can keep it." He then leaned in a bit and whispered to her, "It's a bit dirty, though. I'm sorry about that." He looked apologetic. Kathy laughed a little and walked over to her friends. "Atta boy, you got some moves." One of the guys punched Jacob's shoulder when he saw her walking away. "What moves? She was soaked because of the rain. Shouldn't I have given her my jacket?" Jacob murmured.
"You are interested in Kathy, aren't you?"
Another classmate couldn't contain his excitement. "Shut up. You guys have embarrassed me enough." Jacob glanced at him. "She must be interested in you, judging from my experience." Sam joined their conversation abruptly. "Experience? If I'm not mistaken, aren't you single?" Jacob cut him off and asked. Sam acted as if he was deeply hurt by this statement. He patted his chest and said, "That doesn't mean that I'm not experienced. When I was in high school..." The others immediately covered their ears and started shaking their heads. Listening to Sam's brilliant history of girlfriends was worse than watching a boring drama show. Jacob changed his clothes after lunch and headed to the mechanical drawing class in the afternoon with his roommates. The four of them chose the same class, but Kathy hadn't enrolled for this course. And so, she wouldn't run into them and certainly wouldn't be able to return Jacob's jacket. Their classes for the week were done as the 2-hour lecture came to an end. The Internet Cafe was their Friday afternoon go-to place. However, instead of joining them, Jacob said he needed to go home that weekend. Sam and the others knew about his grandma's incident and assumed he was in a hurry to go see her, and so they didn't insist that he came along with them. Jacob said goodbye to them and stuffed 2 umbrellas in his bag. He then took a bus to Cherry Grove High School, where Sophie was writing her exam. He didn't know why he suddenly felt the need to pick Sophie up from her school, but he knew he wanted to see her. The day had so far been stressful for him, and spending time with Sophie was just the stress buster he needed. On the way, he thought about the various reactions he could get from her for showing up unannounced. He hoped that she would like it. He considered calling Helen to inform her not to send anyone to pick Sophie up, but decided against it, wanting to keep it a surprise for everyone when they got home. He also didn't want Helen to go through the trouble of cooking special dishes for him, as she would if he announced his visit. It was almost 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and only 10 minutes remained for the end of their last midterm exam. Sophie's school, Cherry Grove High School, was one of the best schools in the city. It came under the Cherry Grove Private School, which had a middle school and a high school in the same premises. Midschoolers could directly enter high school after their graduation. The children of the affluent and wealthy families studied in this reputed school. The street outside was thus crowded with cars such as Audi, BMW, Mercedes, and Bentley. It was like a mini automobile exhibition. Jacob was the only one who came here to pick up a student with just an umbrella in his hand. After a few minutes, the parents who were waiting got out of their cars and searched for their kids as a crowd rushed outside. Since this was a semi-boarding school, most students could only go home on the weekends. Being an exam day and a Friday when all the parents would be waiting for their kids, it was the busiest day of the week. A large group of energetic students from all grades rushed towards the school gate in their uniforms. They were moving forward, akin to the waves of the ocean.
Jacob moved forward to look for Sophie, but couldn't spot her in the sea of students in the same uniform.
"What are you doing here?"
Sophie appeared in front of him suddenly and asked with a surprised smile. Jacob was relieved to see her looking pleasantly surprised on seeing him. He took a sigh of relief and smiled at her. "I'm here to pick you up," Jacob said brightly. Before Sophie could reply, a crude voice boomed loudly at him. "Since when did you decide that it was your turn to pick up my niece?" Jacob turned around and saw Sophie's third uncle, Kenneth, staring at him, standing like a tower beside a black Mercedes. His big eyes and bushy eyebrows stood out from the crowd. Episode 77. The Long Walk Home. Jacob nearly jumped out of his skin as he turned around to see Sophie's favorite Uncle Kenneth waiting for her. He instantly remembered their last encounter and felt disheartened. When Kenneth asked him what he was doing there, he didn't reply. This man was the strongest dragon in the clan who happened to hate him. It was wise not to say anything. "Hey boy, I'm talking to you," Kenneth shouted impatiently when he didn't get a response from Jacob. Jacob decided not to answer the rude man in front of him. Instead, he turned to Sophie and said, "Now that your uncle is here, you should go with him. This was a bad idea." He was disappointed that his plan to spend time with Sophie was ruined, and that too by none other than her favorite uncle. He put one of the umbrellas that he had brought for Sophie back in his bag. Then he looked up at the light rain sprinkling down, opened up his other umbrella, and started walking away.
"What? Why?"
Sophie was disheartened too. She was excited to see Jacob there and wanted to go home with him. According to her, her uncle being there was just a minor hiccup in the plan and not a complete deal breaker. She ran over, grabbed Jacob's arm, and said softly,
"Why are you leaving? You can still come home with us. It'll be nice."
"I am not getting into your uncle's car." Jacob gently took her hand away from his arm. He was expecting Sophie to understand his awkward position. This was about his self-respect. Sophie's third uncle, Kenneth, didn't only hate him, he hated all mortals. He looked down upon them and didn't care about their lives, and this ticked off Jacob even more. "What did you say, kid?" Kenneth heard Jacob with his sharp hearing and shouted from afar.
"Come on! You came all this way for me, and now you're leaving because of this?"
Sophie tried to convince Jacob one last time. "Forget about him. You come with me." Kenneth called Sophie over to him. When she walked up to Kenneth with her head hung down, he sensed her bad mood. He opened the door to let her in, sat on the driver's seat, and started the black Mercedes. Jacob quietly walked along the street with his umbrella. He ignored the luxury cars that were passing him by. He was lost in his own world. It was a random idea to pick Sophie up from school. He not only wanted to see her, but also his grandma, who was still living with Sophie's family. As the car started moving ahead, Sophie looked back at Jacob, sticking her neck out of the window, and saw that he was walking by himself, all gloomy. She wanted to try one last time to get him to go with them.
"Uncle, let's take him with us,"
Sophie said sincerely. "I'm not taking him. Who does he think he is?" Kenneth was stubborn. The car started to leave Jacob behind when Sophie stuck her neck out again to look at Jacob, who was strolling in the rain, and she said to her uncle all of a sudden,
"Uncle Kenneth, stop the car."
"Why? Did you forget something?" Hearing Sophie shout, Kenneth immediately parked the car on the side.
You go ahead, Uncle. Take my backpack with you.
Sophie opened the door and jumped out. Soph, it's raining, Kenneth insisted.
It's fine,
she shouted back as she jumped over a puddle. Jacob was walking with his head down under the umbrella when he saw someone approaching him. He looked up and saw Sophie standing in front of him, breathing heavily.
Give me the umbrella.
She reached out with her hand. Huh? Jacob didn't realize what she meant.
Give me the umbrella.
She repeated it in a louder voice. Jacob snapped out of his gloomy mood, fumbled with his bag, and took the umbrella out. Sophie quickly snatched it from Jacob, opened it up, and walked ahead, taking big steps. Jacob sped up to catch up with her. What are you doing? You want to walk with me when there's a car waiting for you? Jacob asked her with hope in his eyes.
Who wants to keep you company? I just want to enjoy the rain.
Sophie hopped over a small puddle and shrugged. She then smiled at him. Jacob was moved by her gesture. She never admitted it to his face, but the little things she did always showed him how much she cared for him. Soph! Kenneth backed up the Mercedes towards them and rolled down the window.
It's okay, Uncle. You can go back first.
Sophie waved at him. He looked at her in confusion as he noticed the impatience in her tone. He felt wronged and wondered if he had done something to offend his favorite niece. It is becoming more and more difficult to see through this girl. She didn't like him at first, but now... Kenneth sighed as he watched Sophie and Jacob walk together, side by side. Then he stepped on the gas pedal and headed to Dracon's house. The drizzling rain started to fall generously from the sky. The air hadn't been this fresh for quite a while, and the cool and refreshing wind made them feel very comfortable. The light breeze played with their hair as they walked side by side, keeping up a light conversation. Sophie's shoes and socks got wet, but she insisted on walking instead of taking the bus or hailing a taxi. She wanted to spend as much time alone with Jacob as possible, and walking was the slowest way of getting home. They talked about everything and nothing, from their favorite films to their comfort food. Getting out of the car was turning out to be a great decision for Sophie, and Jacob was glad that she took it. He was all set to go back to his college, dejected, but Sophie had saved the day. This not only proved that she cared about him, but also that she was happy with him. "How did your exams go?" asked Jacob.
Just so-so,
she answered. Then she added, with a frown,
You didn't help me cheat.
Hey, I texted you the answers to every question you asked. I'm not even supposed to help you cheat. I'm your tutor. Jacob defended himself.
Oh, come on. It's not like you never cheated on your exams.
Sophie rolled her eyes. Jacob knew that she was right, yet made one last attempt to discourage her from cheating. We only used cheat sheets, and the most serious offense would be peeking at other people's papers. I don't think I've ever seen someone cheat through texts before. Sophie just made a face at his feeble attempt to be a goody-goody and didn't say anything. When will you get your results? Jacob asked.
I am walking with you in this beautiful weather, and all you want to talk about is my exams.
Sophie taunted Jacob as she wanted to change the topic. Seeing how defensive she was, he kept quiet as they continued walking.
You and that class president, what has been going on with you two lately?
Sophie suddenly asked, after taking a few more steps. What are you trying to ask? Jacob was interested.
Just curious,
she shrugged, quickening her pace. Jacob thought to himself as he hurried up and caught up with her. Could she be thinking that Kathy is my girlfriend? Is she jealous? Jacob thought as he looked at her pretty face. Before either of them could say anything else, Sophie's home came into view. Kenneth's black Mercedes was parked outside. Sophie took out her key and opened the door, and they both immediately heard the quarrel going on between her dad and her Uncle Kenneth. They quickly went to the living room.
"What, Dracon? You're inviting those jerks from the South Atlantic?"
Kenneth's loud voice boomed into Jacob's ears. "Quiet. We have guests here." Dracon shushed him. "And whether you like it or not, we need to invite them. They used to be on good terms with us. If we didn't invite them to Soph's 15th birthday party, it could be insulting to them."
"But Dracon!"
Kenneth stopped himself when he noticed that Jacob and Sophie had returned. Jacob didn't want to interrupt what looked like a very serious discussion, but they were right in the middle of the living room, so it was inevitable.
"Dad, Uncle Kenneth, I'm back."
Sophie walked inside and put the umbrella in a corner. "Sir?" Jacob nodded at Dracon as he entered. He didn't want to look rude in front of Dracon, and so he tried to hide how much he despised Kenneth.
"Where's my grandma?"
asked Jacob politely. "She is cooking dinner with Helen in the kitchen." Dracon smiled at him. He then turned to Kenneth with a straight face and said, "Come with me to the study." Kenneth's face turned red as he looked down. He then followed Dracon, his taller and mightier brother, into the study. But he made sure to scowl at Jacob before leaving the room. Episode 78. Jacob's Parents. The vibe in the living room still felt tense, even after Dracon and Kenneth moved their conversation to Dracon's study. Jacob and Sophie stepped into the kitchen and greeted Helen and Jacob's grandmother Louise, who were busy cooking. Since dinner wasn't ready yet, Helen asked Jacob and Sophie to go upstairs and hang out in her room till dinner was served. They promptly went upstairs and sat down comfortably. Sophie stepped inside the attached bathroom and changed into denim shorts and a floral white t-shirt with pink flowers printed on it. Jacob hid his blush as he saw her. She looked adorable.
"I'm going to play some online video games with my friends. Do you want to read meanwhile?"
Sophie asked Jacob, as this was usually the time she played with her friends and didn't want to ditch them. Jacob nodded and took out a half-read novel out of his bag and picked up from where he had left. He thought of something, closed the book, and asked Sophie, "So, I heard it's your birthday soon."
"It's next month,"
Sophie answered. She turned on the computer before changing into the pink slippers she usually wore in her room.
"What was your uncle saying about the South Atlantic?"
Jacob continued to ask. He knew very little about the dragon tribe and felt like an outsider at times. He felt like a mere mortal while asking these questions. At times, every movement and every word the dragon spoke seemed to be a mystery to him.
"The South Atlantic is also a dragon clan, just like our North Atlantic dragon clan, but they have different areas under their control. They suck at running businesses on the land, and they are stupid and arrogant."
Sophie's tone revealed her resentment toward the South Atlantic. "Are there other clans in the country, too?" Jacob speculated.
"Yeah, but we have little contact with them. We only meet at the annual conference,"
Sophie replied while waiting for the computer to start.
"Annual conference?"
Jacob asked again.
"Yeah, it's a yearly meeting when all the clans come together. Besides the annual conference, there are also biannual Dragon Tribe meetings. This stuff is more complicated than you can imagine. However, it's none of my business, and my dad takes care of it," she said.
The game flashed on the computer screen, and Sophie jumped onto her chair and grabbed the mouse. She was no longer in the mood to educate Jacob on the dragon world. Jacob didn't want to ask any more questions either. He knew he must get used to it gradually, since things, just like Sophie said, were more complicated than he had imagined. From Sophie's short answers, Jacob learned that Dracon was running the North Atlantic Dragon Clan and thus had a lot on his plate. No wonder he was busy all day long, and his younger brother, Kenneth, exceeded him in cultivation levels. As the Dragon King's wife, Helen was also a busy woman. Only Sophie, cherished by all, was the most stress-free and happiest one. Nobody had let her feel any pressure about the clan's functioning for even a single day. When the throne is passed down to her, she will have to shoulder all of the responsibilities, and Jacob would also have to do the same. Sitting in the reclining chair and looking at Sophie, who was busy playing the online game, Jacob mused to himself, "I need to be capable enough to rule this dragon clan along with Sophie. No wonder everyone expects me to be a good cultivator." After thinking for a while, he picked up his novel again and started reading it to kill time. The clock ticked away and dinner was soon ready.
"Soph, Jacob, come down for dinner,"
Helen called out to them, standing at the foot of the stairs.
"Coming."
Sophie and Jacob answered and got up at the same time and went downstairs together.
"Where is Uncle Kenneth?"
Climbing down the stairs, Sophie saw that her uncle wasn't there.
"He had to go back to finish up some business,"
Helen said, with a helpless expression on her face.
"He must have quarreled with Dad,"
Sophie pointed out before sitting down.
"It doesn't matter. I will go visit him later," she said.
Seeing her father and uncle fight about things was nothing new for Sophie. She knew that both of them were hot-headed and stubborn men who wouldn't back down even if they were wrong.
"Your uncle is very short-tempered. He needs time to think things over,"
Helen took off the apron and said, defending her husband. She then turned to Jacob and his grandma and added,
"Louise, Jacob, let's eat." "Well,"
Jacob's grandma sat down and said,
"I've stayed here for too long. I'm sorry for the trouble I have caused you,"
she said.
"No trouble at all. Louise, you have helped me a lot. I love having you here,"
Helen said warmly. Grandma smiled and turned to Jacob as she said,
"Jacob, I've decided along with your father that tomorrow both our families will have lunch together and get to know each other."
"Tomorrow," Jacob nodded, having expected that this day would come soon.
"So this dinner is the last meal I will have in Sophie's home,"
Grandma added with slight melancholy. She was going to miss this place. During her stay, she and Helen had become friends. She also liked Sophie a lot, and although Dracon rarely spoke, he showed sincerity and respect towards her. Those were the reasons why Louise felt reluctant to leave their home. After all, her son and daughter-in-law, who had always been busy with their work, had never been able to give her such warmth. These strangers had treated her like their own family member, and she had gotten really comfortable with them.
"Don't say that. You can come over any time you want. If you want, you can stay here forever,"
Helen said immediately.
"That's impossible. I can't trouble you any more. Come now, let's eat,"
Grandma said, trying to cheer her up. Seeing the sorrow and reluctance on Grandma's face, Jacob wished that she could continue to live here. However, just like Grandma said, they couldn't trouble Sophie's family anymore. Besides, his mom and dad had returned, and there was absolutely no reason for his grandma to live in someone else's home as much as she wanted to. "Jacob, you can stay here for the night. No need to go back to the hostel," Dracon said abruptly.
"Okay,"
Jacob said immediately, wanting to spend more time with the family. He had really grown to love coming here every day, more than he had ever loved going back home. It was drizzling outside, and the atmosphere in the dining room was a little damp because Grandma was leaving. It was the second time that Jacob stayed the night in Sophie's home. He slept on the bedding on the floor in his grandma's room, and they chatted well into the night. Grandma was full of praise for Sophie's family, and it was clear to Jacob that she had formed a deep bond with them during her short stay there. He was glad to hear her go on and on about how loving Sophie was. Ever since he got engaged to Sophie, the only thing nagging Jacob's mind was whether his grandma would like her. Seeing her so fond of Sophie, he was relieved. His grandmother's approval was all that mattered to him. The next day was Saturday, and it was a sunny day. Helen had reluctantly packed for Grandma while still trying to change her mind about leaving. Grandma wanted to stay with them, but she also felt uncomfortable staying any longer. To show her gratitude, she had asked her son to book a reservation at the best restaurant in the city. The lunch was scheduled for 12 p.m. According to the plan, Jacob's parents would drive to Sophie's home to pick up Grandma's bags before going to the restaurant together for lunch. However, Jacob's parents didn't show up at 12. Grandma, who had been restless all morning, couldn't wait any longer and called her son. Soon, she was informed that they were delayed and would arrive soon. Therefore, they all sat in the living room and waited. Jacob's grandmother was a little embarrassed in front of Sophie's family as her son was so late. Punctuality mattered a great deal to her, and she was annoyed. Half an hour passed, and Jacob's parents still hadn't shown up. Grandma, who had been trying to appear calm, became agitated.
"Louise, take it easy. The traffic must have delayed them,"
Helen comforted her. Jacob was getting impatient too. Sophie's family put off everything for this lunch and waited for his parents, but they just wouldn't show up. He was more anxious than his grandmother, since he knew that they weren't making an ordinary person waiting for them. This was the Dragon King they were about to have lunch with, and they were late. Another half hour passed. As Grandma was about to call again, a white Ford arrived at the door. Jacob's father, in a deep blue suit, and his mother, in a long dress and a matching color, came out of the car and hurried over hand in hand. They matched each other perfectly, be it their looks, choice of clothes, or temperaments. If Kathy was here, she would have been stunned, because the couple were none other than Dr. Mila and Dr. Walter Brown, who gave a science lecture at their university a couple of days ago. The world-famous scientists were Jacob's parents. Episode 79. Grandma's Outburst. As soon as Walter and Mila walked up to the entrance of the house, Jacob's grandma marched towards them with an unpleasant expression. She didn't think twice about being in front of outsiders and yelled,
"Is this the way to treat the people who have helped you?" "Louise, please calm down. It's okay. They are here now."
Helen tried to stop Jacob's grandma from getting worked up, as she was worried that it would cause another spike in her blood pressure.
"No, Helen, please stay out of this. This is between me and my son,"
Grandma said, showing her hand to Helen to stop her from defending her son and daughter-in-law. Walter hurriedly took 2 steps forward and explained, "I had to handle some urgent business in the office, and that's why we're a bit late." His explanation was insincere, with no amount of guilt or remorse in his tone. He expected his mother to understand how important his work was to him. He didn't bother thinking about how he had wasted the time of other people, the people who he was supposed to thank and honor today for saving his mother's life.
"Your office is your priority? And this old woman is none of your concern, right?"
Grandma's face fell as she asked. Seeing the awkward situation between her husband and mother-in-law, Mila said,
"Mom, please calm down. Your blood pressure."
She wanted to defuse the situation since it was very embarrassing for a world-renowned scientist to have his mother scold him like that in front of strangers. But her interference backfired on her.
"Oh, so now you care about my blood pressure. Where were you when I passed out and had to be taken to the hospital? Leave that. Where have you been Jacob's whole life? I'm the one who has raised him because, for you both, nothing is more important than your research. I may not be as educated as you, but even I know that you can't neglect your own family in the name of work."
Grandma kept on lashing out at her son and his wife. Most people would not listen to their parents berate them like this, but Walter and Mila listened to every word she had to say with their heads down, as they knew that she was right. They had not only been bad children, but also bad parents to Jacob, and it was about time someone knocked some sense into them.
"I never said anything to you about this because I used to think that your work was more important than Jacob and I. But there is a limit to my patience. You know very well that I had been sick, and you have been in town since Thursday, but you only got time to come and see me now? Am I that insignificant to you? Do you realize that if it wasn't for Helen and her family, I would have been dead? Would you have even come to my funeral?"
Grandma asked them in a calmer tone. Both of them flinched at the question. Mila said in a low voice,
"Mom, please don't say that."
They were both grown-up and accomplished people, but today they were standing in front of their mother like two kids who had broken a valuable in the house or something. They were filled with guilt as they realized that Louise's reaction today wasn't just because they were late for lunch. It was a result of all the pent-up angst that she had harbored against them over the years. If their own mother had so much anger against them, they didn't even want to imagine how much their son must hate them. Sophie's family and Jacob were standing there as silent spectators as they were all terrified of this side of the sweet and loving grandma that they were getting used to over the past few weeks. They got to witness her anger for the first time ever. Helen stepped back immediately after the first time Louise had asked her to, and Sophie was in the back, a bit shocked. Jacob was also just looking at his parents emotionlessly because he knew that they deserved this.
"Why not? It's true. These people saved my life and took me into their home, and this is how you thank them? Winning a few awards doesn't mean that your time is more important than others. This is the last straw for me. I will not tolerate you both looking down upon other people and your own family just because you are a little more educated than them."
By the time Grandma finished speaking, her breathing was heavy and her heart rate was high.
"It is my fault, Mom. I promise this will not happen again."
Walter moved forward and held his mother's hand in his and said with sincerity,
"I'm in the wrong too."
Mila took 2 steps forward and said with her head hung low,
"Louise, don't work yourself up. You have to take care of your blood pressure."
Helen took the opportunity, seeing that she had calmed down a little.
"Grandma, please don't be so angry."
Sophie also walked over to comfort her. Jacob moved to his grandma's side and gently patted her back, helping her calm down.
"I promise that you will not have any more complaints with us, Mom,"
Walter told her sincerely. He was embarrassed by getting scolded by his mother in front of strangers at first, but soon he forgot all about that and decided to focus on the real problem. Mila also smiled and nodded at her mother-in-law.
We'll see about that. For now, let's head to the restaurant. Go get my bags."
Grandma was still a little angry, but tried to let go of it for Helen's family's sake. Walter and Mila immediately rushed to load their mother's luggage into the car, afraid of offending her again, which might lead to another visit to the hospital. After several deep breaths, Grandma returned to her amiable self and said to Helen and Dracon,
"I apologize for what happened today."
"It's all right," Dracon said with a smile. After several days of rest in Helen's home, Grandma was much stronger, and she looked healthier. She was old, but she was very observant. She knew Helen must have put nutritious ingredients in the chicken soup that she had been making for her. Also, she noted how much Helen liked Jacob. Seeing Sophie and Jacob together, she found her grandson's calm and understanding temperament quite matched with Soph's cute and bubbly nature. Now, she was more certain than ever that their marriage would be a successful one. All she needed to do was express her wishes to both the families, and hopefully, they would see her perspective. Now that she had told everyone that Helen's family was her savior and showed them her authority as the family head, everything else would go smoothly. She was willing to wait a few years, as long as Sophie and Jacob had feelings for each other. She didn't mind Sophie's age, since when she was young, she had seen a lot of couples with age differences back in her day. Jacob was oblivious to his grandma's plan underneath her outburst. He escorted her out of the door and into his father's Ford. He wasn't very close to his parents, but was still glad that they were here to meet the family he had found because of Sophie. Both families took their cars and decided to meet at the restaurant. Helen and Dracon chatted about the incident on the way, while Sophie sat silently in the back seat.
"Louise really scared me today. What if she'd gotten another attack?"
Helen said with concern. "Yes, I was concerned too, but she is fine. She is a strong woman." Dracon comforted his wife.
"Do you think we should talk about Jacob and Soph's arrangement at lunch?" Helen asked.
"I think we can. Since Louise already likes our Soph, and after today, we know that in Jacob's case, she will have the final say." Dracon told her what he thought. Sophie was silently listening to her parents talk about her marriage so casually.
"It feels like sometimes they forget that I'm just 15 right now,"
Sophie thought to herself and sighed. She liked Jacob, but that didn't mean that she was just ready to jump into a white dress. All this was moving really fast according to her, but she couldn't do anything about it since this was the only way.
"It'll be fine. Jacob will be a good husband,"
Sophie mused to herself as she looked outside the window at the clouds that were moving alongside their car. Episode 80. Jacob's Girlfriend. In contrast to the lively discussion between Dracon and Helen, the 4 members of Walter's family were silent in the white Ford. Sitting in the back seat with Jacob, Grandma was still upset. It was unacceptable for Walter and Mila to be over an hour late on such an important day. Afraid of upsetting her again, Walter and Mila dared not start a conversation. Like Sophie, who was in the black Chevrolet, Jacob looked out at the white clouds and got lost in his own thoughts. The 2 cars arrived at the restaurant, which was located in the center of the city, and the 2 families greeted each other again and were ushered to their reserved table. They all sat down and placed their orders. Due to Grandma's fury, they didn't get to introduce themselves to each other and started doing so at the table. "I'm Jacob's father, Dr. Walter Brown," And this is Jacob's mother, Dr. Mila Brown." Walter stood up and introduced himself and his wife. "Nice to meet you." Dracon nodded and stood up as well. "I'm Dracon. This is my wife, Helen, and this is our daughter, Sophie. Under Jacob's good tutoring, Soph's performance in school has improved greatly," he said. "I'm grateful for the excellent care your family has given to my mom. I don't know what we would have done without you guys. Today, my wife and I want to express our gratitude." Walter began talking to Dracon. "It's no big deal. We loved having Louise with us. She has become a member of our family." Dracon waved his hand and said, modestly, "Mr. and Mrs. Brown are both well-known scientists who are well respected by everyone. We've heard so much about your work and achievements. We didn't know that you were Jacob's parents. It's a great honor to meet you," Helen added. "I'm just doing some research, and I'm still far from being a renowned scientist." Walter's face turned a bit red. He remembered how terribly he had been scolded by his mum because of his work and didn't want to focus on it this afternoon. "What do you guys do?" Mila asked warmly, sensing her husband wanted to change the topic. She also wanted to get to know this family better. It was rare to meet people who were so kind and helpful. Dracon answered, "I run a small business, and my wife runs a small design studio." "That is so nice," Walter answered courteously. Walter knew that Dracon was just being humble. Judging by the interiors of Dracon's house and the car he drove, Walter knew that his business wasn't small. However, he wasn't aware that Dracon's company was actually the biggest in all of Wisconsin. It was also one of the most prominent machinery manufacturing groups in the country. Although Helen's design studio had only about a dozen employees, it had an excellent reputation in the circle of interior designers of the city and was ranked among the top 6 design studios in the country. "Your daughter is beautiful. Is she in high school?" Mila looked at Sophie, who was sitting across the table, and smiled. "Yes, she is in her senior year. She is not a diligent student, and that's why we asked Jacob to tutor her," Helen answered with a smile. "I hope our Jacob didn't cause you too much trouble," Mila continued. "Not at all. Jacob is smart and considerate. We completely trust him with our Soph. I like him very much, and so does my husband. He will make an excellent son-in-law." Helen beamed at Jacob. Mila didn't realize Helen was being serious about Jacob's marriage. She chuckled and said that he still had a long way to go. "I'm sure Jacob will follow in your footsteps and become a great scientist, won't he?" Helen asked. "No, no." Mila waved her hand immediately and replied, "Walter and I are both in the science field and know it is too demanding of a career. That's why we have never pushed him in this direction. We hope he can live an ordinary life, doing something that he likes." Helen nodded and was satisfied with this answer. She had been worried that Jacob would put all his time and energy into his work, much like his parents, and end up neglecting Sophie. "Sophie looks so pretty and smart. She will definitely do great things one day," Mila complimented. Helen chuckled at this and said, "With her current academic performance, we don't expect too much of her. We just hope that she will live a good life and can find a good husband who loves her." "She's just in high school. Isn't it too early to think about that?" Mila was a bit confused. "Is it ever too early?" Helen pointed out. The mothers were warming up to the topic as they waited for the food to arrive. In the eyes of the public, Mila was a renowned scientist, but on the inside, she was just an ordinary mother who loved to talk about her kid. She and her husband were both famous, but they hadn't kept high expectations from their son. Their lives looked dignified and high above the crowd, but it was very hard. They hoped that Jacob's life would be simpler and more comfortable. This was one of the reasons they worked so hard, to provide their son with a life that they didn't get. Otherwise, with their abilities, they could have sent Jacob to the best schools in the world and provided him with access to the best education possible. Meanwhile, Jacob had always been low-key, never using his parents' names for his convenience. He worked hard, climbed the academic ladder all by himself, and finally entered a well-known university on his own merit. One could say that his sharp brain and intelligence were genetic because of his parents, but his perseverance made him what he is today. Of course, it was not a secret that Walter and Mila had a son named Jacob. A few officials in the government and a few of their colleagues knew about him, but they also knew that they wouldn't want to bring him in the limelight and take away his childhood. They also didn't want to do any special favors for their son so that he could experience a life away from the luxury and public attention in his growing years. While Mila and Helen warmed up to each other, Dracon and Walter talked about their work on the other side of the table. Since neither of them knew much about the other's profession, their talk sounded superficial and forced. As for Jacob and Sophie, they just looked at each other from across the table. They smiled at each other whenever their eyes met, but that was it. They felt awkward talking to each other in that group, especially when Jacob's parents didn't know about their actual relationship. While the parents began to get familiar and the topics got broader and more profound, they still couldn't contribute and just observed the direction of their conversation cautiously. As the servers began placing the dishes on the table, Jacob and Sophie busied themselves with eating, which was another excuse not to join in their parents' conversations. Jacob's grandmother also sat there quietly, letting the parents bond before she brought up the main subject in her mind. "You are very busy, and you don't stay in the country often, do you?" Seeing that Dracon and Walter had exhausted all possible topics to talk about, Helen started talking to Walter. "Oh, we do occasionally travel to other countries for our research, but we stay in the country most of the time. However, Mila and I spend all our time working in our labs at our respective research institutes. We don't get to spend much time with Mom or Jacob. Fortunately, he has turned out to be a fine young man and is very independent," Walter answered. "So you don't usually have time to take care of Louise, right?" Helen asked, cautiously. "We have hired Uncle James to take care of my mother. We usually squeeze in some time to stay with her when we're in the country, but Mom's recent illness made us realize that there are some obvious problems with our arrangement. Mila and I discussed it, and we are considering hiring another person whose sole responsibility will be to take care of my mother," Walter replied. Grandma, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. "I can still move around. I don't need hired help to take care of me." "I have a suggestion," Helen said lightly. "Since Louise got along with us well, and you are very busy, she can live in our home, and we can take care of each other," she added. Walter immediately shook his head and replied, No, we have troubled you enough. We can't put any more burden on you." "So I'm a burden?" Grandma spat out and raised an eyebrow at her son. It was clear that she was still mad at him. "Mom, that's not what I meant." Hurriedly, Walter turned to his mother and explained. "After coming back to the city, and while you were traveling, you called me twice. That's it. Doesn't it mean that I'm a burden to you?" Grandma asked, getting annoyed again. "Mom, ever since Walter and I have returned, we were making time to give lectures at Jacob's University, and then the supervisors arranged for us to be interviewed by all kinds of media. We were so busy that we didn't even have much time to sleep," Mila tried to explain. "I will be left with hired help. It seems that I'm really a burden." Ignoring Mila's explanation, Grandma continued complaining. In reality, Walter cared a great deal about his mother. However, Each time he called her, she would complain over the phone for more than an hour because she missed him and couldn't stop expressing her displeasure loudly. This used to make Walter's schedule even tighter, and his mother was never happy on the phone either. Gradually, he began calling her less often, and their conversations became rare. As Grandma went on with her dilemma, a thought occurred to Mila.
Maybe Mom wouldn't complain much once Jacob got married.
With that thought in mind, she turned to her son and asked,
Jacob, the girl who came to our lecture with you is your girlfriend, isn't she?